Okay, let's unpack this. We're taking a deep dive today into, well, a very specific corner of the global economy, but one that's surprisingly vital for sustainability. The market for HD7 and HD8 thinking agents.
That's right. And, these aren't just generic chemicals. Based on the report we're looking at, HD7 and HD8 are specific advanced formulations. They're crucial for separating ink from recycled paper fibers.
Right.
Think of them as highly specialized tools that make high-quality paper reuse possible, directly supporting, sustainable recycling and eco-friendly printing.
And we've got a market report here that gives us a pretty detailed look, right, where this market has been and where it's projected to go. The top-line numbers alone tell a clear story of growth. This market was valued at, what, $804.1 million back in 2021?
And that figure is on a steady climb. The report projects it'll reach $970 million by 2025.
Okay, so that's coming up soon. But the longer-term forecast is really compelling. Looking out to 2033, the market's expected to hit $1,411.4 million, so $1.4 billion.
Yeah, which translates to a compound annual growth rate, a CAGR of 4.8% across that whole period, from 2021 right through to 2033.
Okay.
That's solid growth, especially, considering it's for such a specific type of chemical agent.
Right. So our mission for this deep dive is really to understand what's driving that 4.8% growth. We need to look at the regional breakdown and see which parts of the world are contributing the most to this expansion.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this market performance isn't happening in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
The report identifies key forces pushing this forward. Primarily, we're looking at regional industrial growth, an increasing global focus on environmental policies that mandate or encourage recycling.
Makes sense.
And just a rising demand for effective solutions to reuse paper fibers, the whole circular economy idea.
So basically, industries grow, they need more paper. Environmental rules demand we recycle that paper. And these specific agents are key to making that recycling process work well, giving us high-quality recycled paper. It makes sense that those drivers would fuel demand. Now, where is this growth most prominent? Let's maybe start with North America.
Okay, North America. It presents a picture of consistent growth. The region as a whole is forecast to expand from $226 million in 2021 to $264.8 million by 2025, and then on to $369.8 million by 2033.
Okay.
That results in a regional CAGR of 4.3%.
4.3. And within that is the U.S. that's sort of the big player.
The United States absolutely leads the region, yeah. Its market for these agents is projected to grow from $186.3 million in 2021 to $301.6 million by 2033.
Okay.
That's a 4.2% CAGR.
Slightly below the regional average then. What about Canada and Mexico?
Well, Canada actually shows slightly faster growth than the U.S. It moves from $24.3 million in 2021 up to $41.9 million in 2033. That's a 4.7% CAGR.
Okay.
And Mexico's market also expands steadily. It goes from $15.4 million to $26.3 million over the same period at a 4.4% CAGR.
So it's a healthy picture in North America, but maybe not explosive, kind of steady growth.
That's a good way to put it. Steady.
Yeah. All right, let's move across the pond to Europe. How does its growth compare?
Europe's market for these defunking agents collectively totaled $188.2 million back in 2021.
All right.
The report sees it growing to $221.2 million in 2025 and then reaching $317.6 million by 2033.
Okay, so smaller overall than North America currently, but what's the growth rate?
The regional CAGR there is 4.6%, so a bit higher than North America's average.
Interesting. Are there specific European countries showing particular strength, maybe driven by, stricter environmental standards or something?
That certainly seems to be a factor. The United Kingdom, for example, is projected to grow from $20.9 million in 2021 to $36.5 million by 2033. That's a strong 4.9% CAGR.
Nearly 5%. Okay.
And Germany's market is even more dynamic. Forecast to rise from $32.6 million to $58.1 million in 2033. That hits a 5% CAGR.
5% is a decent clutch, yeah.
It is. France also shows solid progress, going from $21.1 million in 2021 to $33 million by 2033. That's a 4% CAGR. And the report also highlights growth in several others over that 2021 to 2033 period. Italy moves from $12.2 million to $18.1 million. Russia from $25.8 million to $41.3 million. Spain from $13.2 million to $21 million. And
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
$14.2 million to $21 million, and Luxembourg from $5.3 million to $7.9 million.
Quite a few players there. What about the rest of Europe category? Sometimes that hides interesting trends.
It does here, actually. The rest of Europe category shows quite impressive growth collectively. It actually outpaces some of those individual countries we just mentioned.
Really?
Yeah, moving from $47 million in 2021 to $86.4 million in 2033. That's a CAGR of 5.1%.
Wow.
So it suggests broad adoption across numerous smaller European markets is really contributing significantly to that overall European growth figure.
Okay, so solid growth in both North America and Europe, slightly stronger in Europe.
Yeah.
But the report really points to one region as the kind of the powerhouse for future growth, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Asia Pacific. It's identified as the clear, fastest growing region globally for these specific Deinking agents. Its market expanded from $297.5 million in 2021, expected to hit $360.8 million in 2025,
Right.
and is projected to reach a substantial $550.5 million by 2033.
Over $500 million just in APAC. And the growth rate?
That's a remarkable regional CAGR of 5.4%.
Wow, okay. That's significantly higher than North America or Europe. What's driving that acceleration in Asia? Is it just scale?
A lot of it comes down to scale, yeah, and the pace of industrial development combined with evolving environmental regulations. China leads the region by market size, expected to grow from $127.7 million in 2021 to $239.1 million by 2033.
And the ADR there?
China's CAGR is 5.5%. But interestingly, the report specifically calls out India for showing the strongest acceleration in growth rate.
Okay, tell me about India. That sounds significant.
Yeah, India's market for these HD7 and HD8 agents is projected to surge from $55.9 million in 2021 all the way to $110.6 million in 2033.
Wow, nearly doubling.
Exactly, nearly doubling in just over a decade. That gives it a robust CAGR of 5.9%.
5.9%. That really jumps out, doesn't it? For a specific chemical agent market like this, that's quite telling about the underlying industrial and environmental shifts happening in India.
It certainly highlights the momentum there. It suggests a swift build-out or maybe upgrading of paper recycling infrastructure.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
What about other players in APAC?
They also contribute substantial growth. Japan increases from $32 million to $54.8 million by 2033. South Korea goes from $21.1 million to $33.6 million. Australia from $6.6 million to $10.1 million.
Okay.
And Southeast Asia as a whole also plays a significant role, growing from $42.2 million in 2021 to $74.5 million in 2033.
Right. So if you're looking at where the real action is in this market, it's Asia Pacific, particularly India with that really high growth rate, and China, just because of the sheer volume.
That's the main story, yeah.
What about South America? How does it fit in?
South America also shows healthy growth, although, on a smaller absolute scale than the major regions. Brazil actually tops the chart there, growing from $15.9 million in 2021 to $31.2 million by 2033. That's a 5.2% CAGR.
5.2%. That's actually a higher rate than the North American average.
It is, yeah. Argentina grows from $5.2 million to $9.3 million. That's a 4.4% CAGR. Colombia shows potential, increasing from $3.4 million to $6.6 million at a 5% CAGR.
Yeah.
And Peru and Chile also contribute. Peru moves from $2.3 million to $4 million, and Chile from $2.1 million to $3.7 million over that period.
Got it. And finally, let's cover the Middle East and Africa. What's the picture there?
This region presents a slightly more varied picture. Egypt's market for these agents is projected to climb from $5.9 million in 2021 to $10.2 million in 2033.
Okay.
And Turkey is expected to grow from $4.6 million to $8.8 million.
Right.
But the report notes that the rest of the Middle East region, sort of collectively, shows a slower CAGR of 3.3%, reaching $14.4 million by 2033 from $8.5 million in 2021.
So a bit slower overall in that rest of Middle East part.
Okay.
So putting all these regional pieces together, what's the big takeaway from this deep dive into the market report?
Well, I think the central message is really clear. The global market for these specific agents, HD7 and HD8, is on a solid, sustained growth trajectory.
Right.
And it's driven fundamentally by that increasing global commitment to paper recycling and, frankly, the need for effective technology to actually achieve it properly.
Yeah. These specific agents are essential enablers of that trend, aren't they? They support the shift towards a more circular economy for paper products. Their market growth seems to directly reflect the expanding scale and maybe the sophistication of paper recycling operations worldwide.
Exactly. It highlights how these, sometimes niche chemical markets are intimately linked to broader environmental goals and the industrial development happening globally,
Mm.
especially in rapidly growing economies like we saw in India and China.
Okay, so wrapping up, here's something to consider as you think about the future of paper recycling. And maybe you can mull this over. The report gives us a forecast based on current trends
Hmm.
and those drivers we discussed, industrial growth, policy demand.
Hmm.
But how might unforeseen shifts, maybe even more ambitious environmental regulations than we currently anticipate, or perhaps a sudden surge in consumer demand for products made only from recycled paper, how might those things potentially impact the pace and even the regional distribution of the market's growth? Could those factors significantly alter the trajectory we've just explored?
You probably toss paper into the recycling bin without much thought, right? I mean, most of us do.
Yeah, it's just automatic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But have you ever stopped to think about the hidden chemistry, the stuff that actually makes it possible to turn that old paper into something useful again?
Probably not something most people consider day to day.
Well, today we're doing a deep dive into a really specific part of that, the market for HD7 and HD8 dinking agents.
Sounds niche, but it's surprisingly important.
It really is. We've got this market insights report here. That's our source material. And our job really is to unpack it for you. You want to pull out the key drivers, the roadblocks, the trends.
So you can get why these chemicals actually matter for, sustainability and the paper we all use.
Precisely. Think of this as your inside look.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
The paper we all use.
Precisely. Think of this as your inside look. Okay, so let's unpack this report. What's actually fueling the demand for these specific agents, the HD7 and 8 ones?
Well, the report points to a couple of big things.
Go on.
First off, it's the huge global push for more recycled paper products. Everyone wants sustainable options.
Right, companies, governments, setting those big goals.
Exactly. And to meet those goals, you need tons of high-quality recycled fiber. These agents are basically crucial for getting the ink out properly.
So the paper isn't just low-grade stuff.
Right. So it can be used for packaging, newsprint, all sorts of things, not just filler. And then there's the regulatory side.
Regulations. Always a driver.
Definitely. The report mentions agencies cracking down, pushing for less waste going to landfill, better fiber recovery.
So more pressure to recycle effectively.
Yeah, and that directly bumps up the need for these more advanced dinking agents that can handle the job efficiently.
What's really fascinating here, I think, is how these aren't just, isolated market forces.
No, absolutely not. They're tying directly into the whole idea of the circular economy.
How so?
Well, the sustainability goals and the regulations create the demand for better recycling. And these agents, especially the advanced HD7 and 8 types the report focuses on, they're like the bridge.
The bridge.
Yeah, they let that waste paper become a resource again, multiple times, turning a potential waste headache into, well, an opportunity.
Okay, makes sense. But it can't all be smooth sailing, right? What challenges does the report highlight for this market?
Oh, definitely not smooth sailing. There are some pretty significant hurdles.
Like what?
One big one is raw material prices. The stuff needed to make these agents, like certain surfactants, their costs can swing wildly.
Because of supply chains, oil prices, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Petrochemicals, sometimes plant-based oils too, it makes production costs really unpredictable for the chemical companies. It's a headache.
Okay, so cost volatility. What else?
Then there's the technical side. Modern inks. The report flags things like UV-cured inks.
The really tough ones.
Yeah, they're designed to last, which means they're incredibly hard to remove in recycling, dinking them effectively without wrecking the paper fibers. That takes more sophisticated and often pricier agents.
So you need better tech, but that potentially drives up cost while you're already dealing with unstable raw material prices.
Precisely. And layered on top of that are the environmental and safety concerns around chemicals generally. There's a push for greener options.
Right. So connecting this back, it creates a real balancing act, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The report implicitly raises this question: how do you get the high performance needed for today's tricky recycling challenges, keep it affordable, and make it environmentally sound?
That's the million-dollar question, I suppose.
It's driving a lot of the innovation we're seeing.
Okay, so let's talk about that adaptation.
Yeah.
How is the market evolving? What trends does the report point out?
Well, A major one is the shift towards greener chemistry, more eco-friendly, biodegradable formulas.
Driven by regulations and just customer demand.
Both. Customers downstream, the paper companies, they want greener processes too, so chemical suppliers are really focusing on developing those alternatives.
Makes sense. What else?
We're also seeing more integration, these agents becoming part of sophisticated closed-loop systems in the paper mills, optimizing the whole recycling loop, not just the distinking step.
Getting smarter about the entire process.
Exactly. And finally, customization. Tailoring agent blends specific HD 7 or 8 variations for different kinds of paper waste.
Like office paper versus magazines.
Yeah, to maximize ink removal and get the best possible pulp yield depending on what you're starting with.
So what does all this chemistry stuff, these market dynamics, actually mean for you, the listener? Why should you care?
Well, it directly impacts the recycled products you use every day, the quality, maybe even the cost, and definitely the environmental footprint of that cardboard box, that notebook.
Even things like tissue paper sometimes.
Yeah, certain types. These Deinking agents are working behind the scenes to make that possible, enabling what the report essentially calls a greener, smarter recycling future. It's not just abstract chemistry.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it, how something so specific, these HE7 and 8 agents, underpin such a huge part of our sustainability efforts. We've covered the drivers, the challenges, the trends, all from that market report.
It really shows the hidden complexity, so maybe next time you handle something made from recycled paper, just take a second. Think about the unseen chemistry, the intricate processes that made it possible. And maybe wonder what other parts of our sustainable future rely on complex science we rarely even notice. That's something to chew on.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.